Sinister, which is this new horror film from Scott Derrickson, who did Emily Rose, is yet another found footage film, although the twist being here that the found footage is on celluloid rather than on video. And I was thinking about this, is that the first found on celluloid found footage film since Cannibal Holocaust? Of course, it depends on whether or not you count Joel Schumacher's 8mm, which wasn't really a found footage film. It was a kind of, in the same area, but a bit rubbish. But the interesting thing with celluloid, anything when you have celluloid, it does tap into that Kenneth Anger idea that there is magic in celluloid that you don't have in video. I mean, I remember watching Ringu, the Japanese version of Ring, which people keep sending me saying, of course, in Japanese it's actually just pronounced Ring, the Ringu. Anyway, whatever, that. The idea that, you've managed to make videotape somehow threatening relates back to David Cronenberg, but actually the history of all this is to do with celluloid. So the story is, Ethan Hawke is a true crime writer who desperately needed another big hit. He wrote one big hit book and then have had a couple of duffs since then. Moves to a small town where there is an unsolved murder case. He moves his family into the house, unbeknownst to them, that is the house where the murder happened. Nobody else knows. All his wife cares about is that he keeps all this stuff away from the family.
Is the story a good one this time?
Yeah, it's good. Of course it is.
Will you take me and show me where it happened?
Trevor.
God, I'm old enough to know about this stuff.
No, you're not. Even I'm not old enough to know about this stuff. Your father writes about terrible, terrible things that I don't want you knowing anything about.
Like I shouldn't be writing
That's
about
not
it.
what I meant.
That's the way you say it.
Well, I'm gonna hear about it at school anyway. Kids all hate me again and tell me non-stop about what happened.
Hey, nobody hates you.
Well, I might as well hear it from you.
Are you listening to this?
Yes, I'm listening.
Let's at least make sure your office stays locked. It's one thing to hear about it, it's another thing to see it. I don't want him walking in again. He's 12 years old.
Mom, he knows how old I am.
Hey, stop it. What's the first rule?
Never go in Dad's office.
And what's the rule?
Always lock Dad's office.
That's right. And I don't want to hear another thing about why we're here from anybody.
Yeah.
So Ethan Hawke desperately needs a hit, finds up in the loft a box of Super 8 movies, which actually have the key to the unsolved murders and indeed relate to a bunch of other things. But as he starts playing the films, something starts happening around the house. So you get this kind of strange amalgam of, on the one hand, the themes of Amityville Horror, which of course always, that relates back to Haunting of Hill House. I mean, everything kind of relates back to Haunting of Hill House, to be honest. If all those what's it called? Stephen King called it The Bad Place, Eidos Domos, all those bad place stories. With a little bit of, do you remember that thing, the Stone tapes?
No.
Okay, fine.
Is that like the Faust tapes?
Not really, no. Or the Rolling Stones Missing Session. That idea that by playing something, somehow you start conjuring up magical elements with which, you are dealing with forces which you do not understand. And there is a good idea in there about the idea of light passing through celluloid, somehow conjuring something weird and demonic. And the early sections of the film are quite creepy. They are quite creepy because I quite like the idea of the celluloid. And they're also quite good because they use that now default setting of very, very quiet, very, very quiet, very, very loud, bang, very, very quiet. And I mean, it's funny, because of the way that sound systems work nowadays, cinemas have become louder than they were in the past. People talked in the past about people using sound effects on horror films. I mean, what used to pass for a loud noise in a horror film is now barely audible. Nowadays, modern horror films, if they do quiet loud, the loud is really loud. And it's often, I remember sitting in the screening watching this thinking, am I jumping because that's a well-affected, scare? Or am I jumping because that noise is so loud that actually, even if you were completely prepared for it, you'd still end up jumping? But at the beginning of it, there is something going on, and it's quite well handled, and Ethan Hawke does the whole thing about he's not telling his family because he needs another hit, because he's desperate for something, and therefore he's keeping a secret, and the secret is the thing that's eating. When all those things kind of come together, then about halfway through, it starts to play its hand. It starts to go, okay, this is what the story is about. And from the minute it starts playing its hand, things start to fall apart. So you get, and actually very much, incidentally, like a film like Emily Rose, you get a good setup, an interesting, with a couple of good creepy set pieces, and then it all sort of falls down. It goes a bit pear-shaped, because once you start seeing apparitions that actually look like a slightly naff version of Devil's Backbone, the Guillermo del Toro film, which is an absolutely brilliant movie. It's a ghostly chiller rather than a horror movie. It never does that thing about loud, quite loud and then shouting at you. So it's not without merit. And having said, I never ever want to see another found footage movie again ever in my life. This was like, okay, fine. There is about half an hour, 40 minutes of interesting stuff in here, and you're doing the creeping around the haunted house stuff moderately well. The problem is that after about the halfway point, when you realise where it is that it's going, it does the thing about it reveals itself. And it does remind you of that great thing that you look at a movie like The Haunting. And interesting that The Shining is coming out again quite soon, and it's in the American version. There is that idea that people do fundamentally understand that there is something really terrifying about not seeing something, and unless you are a genius filmmaker revealing something in a horror movie, an awful lot of the time, half the audience is going to go, "Oh, that, okay, fine, that's all right." And it's a shame this kind of loses it about halfway through, but not totally without merit. But as I said before, enough with the found footage film. But if I have to have a found footage film, I can take half of this.